there is another very important phase of warfare. It has as its target not the body, but the minds of the enemy.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل عبارة الحرب النفسية يعتقد أنها قد هاجرت من ألمانيا إلى الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في عام 1941، ووفقاً لكريستوفر سيمبسون الكاتب المتخصص في هذا المجال، فإن هذا يعني التطبيق العلمي للدعاية والإرهاب وضغط الدولة كوسيلة لإحراز انتصار أيديولوجي على الأعداء. قبل الحرب العالمية الثانية كان يفترض اعتبار العمليات النفسية أو الساي أوبس قذرة للغاية وغير فعالة أبداً لممارستها من قبل الولايات المتحدة، على الرغم من أنها كانت لا تزال تستخدم خلال الحرب العالمية الأولى، وإن كان ذلك بقدرات بسيطة. أما ساحات المعارك في الحرب العالمية الثانية فقد كانت مجالات للتجارب وتطوير التكتيكات النفسية المعاصرة، وأدى علماء النفس الأكاديميون والسريريون أيضاً دوراً مهماً في تطوير الساي أوب في الأربعينيات والخمسينيات من القرن الماضي، إذ قدمت برامج ساي وور الأميركية مبلغاً كبيراً لتمويل أبحاث الاتصال الجماهيري. وتصنف عقيدة الساي أوب المعاصرة للولايات المتحدة أنشطة الحرب النفسية تحت 3 أنماط، وهي التكتيكية والتشغيلية والاستراتيجية. فما هي هذه الأنماط وكيف تعمل ومن تستهدف؟ يطيب لنا أن نستقبل الأستاذ سكوت بينيت، الضابط السابق في العمليات الخاصة بالجيش الأميركي في قيادة العمليات النفسية والمحلل العالمي للحرب النفسية ومكافحة الإرهاب، الذي عمل في أعلى مستويات مكافحة الإرهاب الدولية في واشنطن العاصمة وقاعدة ماكديل الجوية في تامبا فلوريدا. وكذلك عمل بينيت في قيادة العمليات الخاصة الأميركية والقيادة المركزية الأمريكية، وكان منسق وزارة الخارجية لمكافحة الإرهاب وفي وكالات حكومية أخرى. خدم في إدارة جورج دبليو بوش من عام 2003 إلى 2008، وكان زميل باحث في العلوم الاجتماعية في مؤسسة التراث أو The Heritage Foundation. لنغوص معه أكثر ونتحدث عن الحرب النفسية وما هي أنواعها المختلفة، وكيف تستخدم هذه الوسيلة القائمة على الحرف والكلمة والصورة ولغة الجسد، ولا سيما في صراعات اليوم. أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. Dr. Scott Bennett, American Operations Officer and a Global Psychological Warfare Counterterrorism Analyst. Welcome to الداخل from the inside, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. It is my great honor to be with you.
Wa alaikum salam. Pure pleasure to have you, sir. Well, psychological warfare, or the Psy War, or the basic aspects of modern psychological operations, the PsyOps, have been known by many other names or terms, including military information support operations, MISO, PsyOps, political warfare, hearts and minds, and propaganda. Today, with the dominance and the advance of the social media, it is branded as the like war. You know, you put the like, the share, and everything like that. How do you define it as an expert on the matter? And what are its various techniques? Who are the target audience? And what about the methods employed, so to say?
Well, psychological warfare has always been about influencing, changing, and persuading people's ideas, their minds, to control their behavior, to go down a certain path or perform certain actions. And they do it with images, sounds, the whole spectrum of influence. So influence operations is to target human beings and manipulate them socially, politically, economically. And what I did in the military, of course, I had a top secret clearance. I worked at the State Department, counterterrorism. I worked in the Army, psychological warfare. I had a TSSCI funny, I had worked with Ed Snowden, who was with me at Booz Allen Hamilton, and what we've seen is a transformation of America into a tyrannical police state, an empire, not a republic. And that goes against the Constitution of the United States. So it's caused a lot of patriots in America, like myself, to stand up saying, this is no longer the America that we swore an oath to support and defend. This is now becoming an empire that has global hegemonic world domination ambitions. So what we see now is psychological warfare and soft power being implemented through the internet, limiting voices of the alternative side too, calling cancel culture, and you see
of course,
that
yes.
Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, deleting accounts of people that perhaps raised the Palestinian issue, raised the fact that the Israeli Zionists have been torturing and killing Palestinians and destroying their homes and seizing their land.
Twisting realities and facts.
Twisting, yes. So they have engaged in a cyberspace psychological warfare to control the narrative, to eliminate truth-telling, and put out a narrative that is, completely fabricated and false. And this has permeated every foreign policy operation of America. So we see, and this has taken a long time. This, you could say started in 1991, but it really quickened under Obama, because Obama signed an executive order that allowed propaganda to be used on American citizens. Before that was outlawed. And after Obama did that, we've seen an acceleration in military operations against Ukraine, against Libya, for example, against Syria,
of course.
Syria, one of the great tragedies.
Today against Iran too.
Against Iran,
in regard to the recent developments taking place in Iran.
The current uprisings in Iran, I have no doubt, are being fomented by the U.S., CIA, MI6, and Mossad working with their puppets in the Mujahideen al-Khaliq.
MEK, of course, sure.
So the U.S. uses mercenaries, and often they brainwash these mercenaries and put them on drugs, Captagon or methamphetamines or other drugs to amplify their energies, to cut off their moral restraint and unleash them like a fire upon the land. And we've seen that becoming the new strategy for low-intensity conflict. And Ukraine is a perfect example.
Sure.
So they've went into Ukraine, they've brainwashed the Ukrainians to develop an impossible hatred against their own cousins in Russia. If there's something more sinister but brilliant, is how the U.S. has brainwashed, with the Israelis helping, of course, and the British. They have brainwashed the Ukrainians to become Nazis, cover themselves with tattoos, and engage in a warfare against Russia, and also
and I guess their own people too.
against their own blood, their own families. The Russians and the Ukrainians are intermarried.
Exactly. Allow me here to ask you, sir, might you elaborate and tell us more on how the seemingly benign social science of mass communication and persuasion grew directly out of secret government-funded research into a psychological warfare where the findings on mass communication were eventually employed for the purposes of propaganda, as we said, subversion, intimidation, and the so-called coin, counterinsurgency?
Well, it really originated in advertising in the late 1800s, 1900s, when commercial advertising was specializing in imagery and language and sounds to evoke an emotional response in people to become customers to products and services. And there were a lot of authors that have contributed and layered the intellectual groundwork on persuasion. Bernays, a lot of classical business advertising marketing minds. And it was, of course, weaponized in World War I and then World War II.
Was the stage for employing such kind of techniques?
Yes, military components utilized a lot of different images and sensibilities to weaponize against soldiers. You know, I won't get into some of the graphic details, but they would weaponize the conquest of other countries and what would happen to their women and their families if they didn't stand up and fight.
And spread rumors, of course, and whatever. This was very much used in the Vietnam War, of course.
World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War.
Afghanistan, too.
Afghanistan, the first Gulf War. And now it's permeated into almost a blind religion of, and this is where things get quite dangerous, because you no longer have professional military experts in the United States understanding the nature of propaganda as a tool of war. It's now becoming almost a religious ideology that intoxicates the military political class in America to believe their own lies.
A cult.
A cult,
so to say.
A brainwash, a self-brainwashing. And you see that in people like General Mark Milley, and of course Joe Biden and his whole cabinet, who are grotesquely inappropriate and unskilled for any political leadership. And many, of course, have said the coup d'etat that was launched against Donald Trump was a complete manipulation of the election and the algorithms, and I know about that too. But they have weaponized information against the American public and foreign publics so that they could unleash this military conquest of really the world. And they've went into Ukraine to try to do it against Russia, but they've been stopped, as Russia stopped them in Syria too, as well as the great General Soleimani, who the United States murdered.
May his soul rest in peace, of course.
God bless him.
God bless him.
I had the great honor of meeting his daughter. And
Zainab.
And I was sad that murder occurred. But again, God says, vengeance is mine, I shall repay. And I think all things will be repaid for the evil that's been unleashed by America.
Right. Experts, sir, believe that definitely words are cheaper than bullets. Consequently, psychological warfare endured because it was a cheap option that might sometimes work and could induce opponents to surrender rather than fight on and on. Psychological operations, or PSYOP, what is the history of Army PSYOPs? What equipment do PSYOP soldiers use and employ?
Well, traditionally they have dropped messages onto the battlefield in the form of leaflets or broadcasting messages through speaker systems on mounted jeeps, or broadcasting directly into the homes via television broadcasts, radio broadcasts. The Voice of America is a classic propaganda campaign. In Ukraine, for example, we have a lot of former American military and State Department who have created a nonprofit organization in Ukraine to broadcast propaganda into the Ukrainian mind for the past 4 or 5 years. So that explains why there's such a brainwashed Frankenstein monster, dullness to the Ukrainian Nazis that are covered in swastikas and such, because they've been subjected to this brainwashing. It raises an interesting issue, though, too, because Americans, the Ukrainians and the Russians, they speak Ukrainian, they speak Russian, they're Slavic. Americans are a different voice, a different tone, a different language. So when you have a different personality speaking on a subject, for example, if an American went into Ukrainian prisoners and told them the Russians have captured a lot of prisoners, and the Ukrainians have subsequently tried to kill a lot of their prisoners to stop them from talking. But if an American went to the Ukrainian prisoners and said, you need to lay down your arms and stop fighting because the Americans, my country, my government, are about to abandon you. Joe Biden is going to be impeached. The Democrats are going to lose the election in a coming week or two. The Republicans are not going to tolerate this war. The American people have never been on board of this war. The American people are going to hold you to an account for all of the biochemical labs that you have allowed to be seated in Ukraine that the United States used to create COVID-19 and the COVID-19 vaccine. Lay down your arms, stop fighting, and you will be saved. An American can say that to the Ukrainian soldiers and they'll listen. And you may have 60, 70, 80% lay down their guns and say, this isn't worth dying for. But Zelensky, the lunatic, and the rest of the Ukrainians are brainwashing their own people to continue to fight to the death. Oh, America will always stand with us. America will continue to fund us. We will be preserved. And that's a lie. So Americans need to tell the Ukrainians it's a lie, and you could have a very successful end to the war.
So, sir, you agree that today it's not only a physical war, it's rather also a psychological war, that much of it is taking place online. The social media disinformation and manipulation are causing confusion. Even people who are clever enough, they could be confused by a tweet or by a post, by a picture. They cannot detect whether it is fabricated or what. They have to scrutinize and re-scrutinize in order to understand if this is fake or this is the true thing. Peter Singer, a professor of practice at the School of Politics and Global Studies at Arizona State University, he describes the growing role of online media in political conflicts as the like war. Might you focus on how, sir, misinformation and consequently disinformation as a subset of misinformation, which is intended to mislead, how does it function, as well as what works to correct and confront it? This is very important.
There are computer systems that specifically have created algorithms using language, subjects, topics, tonality, and these very advanced computer systems, computer network algorithms, weaponize language and imagery and locations to formulate, to really compute. Artificial intelligence formulates perfectly crafted paragraphs that mention just the right words at just the right time and just the right inflection points to have a connection, and that connection to be positive, that connection to check a box and say like, right? You want the poor Ukrainian children to live, don't you? Well, yes, everyone wants that. And they lead them down a path of other choices. Then, vote to end the war, vote to support Zelensky, vote to support Ukraine, vote to continue giving money.
The free country and democracy and so on.
So they
and so
lure
forth.
people into a chain of decisions based on emotional tugs, emotional chords. But the truth is always the counter to that, the truth and the facts. Truth is the strongest weapon in psychological warfare. Lies and half-truths always wither and vanish and break. And that's where we have the advantage, because there's no truth coming out of Washington, D.C. There's no truth coming out of the American military. There's no truth coming out of the mainstream media.
I will come to talk about the issue and the fact that the very important factor of the truth and how this resonates with our part of the world. But what is a way to correct and confront this kind of war?
You need, of course, platforms, speakers, Twitter accounts, YouTube channels, alternative media, broadcasting the truth into the computer information space, into the internet.
Right.
We do a lot of that. We have a channel we've just started, globalfreedomtv.com, where we will be raising the Palestinian issue and raising Iran and raising Russia as great nations of harmonious, traditional values people.
This is going to broadcast from the US of A?
Yes, from the United States.
Very good.
Now, they may attack us.
Of course.
They may stop us, but...
They try to smother you.
Yes, but some righteous fights are worth the fighting, because God gives us the strength and He gives us protection.
Bless you.
He shall give His angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. Another favorite quote I have is, I shall give you a tongue thine enemies cannot gainsay nor resist.
In speaking about this would lead me to the issue of Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. He is defined even by his detractors as the master of psychological warfare momentum, which he employs shrewdly against the Israeli enemy, and we've witnessed this thoroughly during the recent times, particularly during the 2006 Israeli aggression against Lebanon. But the difference between his psy war and opinion fake news psy ops is that he's credible. And he tells the truth, which is the strongest element, as you said, of information war. Truth telling is the strongest, most indefensible against psychological warfare because the truth resonates in people's hearts. How do you look at this side of PsyOps and the Psy war? To what extent has the resistance and its allies, whether in Syria, in Iran, in Russia, elsewhere, they have been successfully able to twist the PsyOps to their benefit and interest?
I think it comes down to a spiritual anointing that God gives to truth and to truth speakers. There's a spiritual revelation and an energy that occurs when we speak truth and hear truth. That is why Nasrallah is very good, very poetic, very charismatic. He's very honest and direct, and he's very comforting to people. And he's also very firm and fearless and bold and courageous. And it's not a manly courage. It's a sense of God is on the side of right and truth, and he is on the side of right and truth. So there's a synergy that we feel, where the liars and the propagandists don't have that because they're speaking out of their own hearts or corruption or agenda, and it doesn't have the same connection. So when we speak truth on all of these different platforms, we are throwing water onto their fires that they're trying to start. We're extinguishing them, and we're doing, again, when we are broadcasting truth, it is for people who are unaware, that are looking and trying to decide, trying to be informed. And that's why I think you say today more and more people coming away from the Israeli, Zionist, U.S., NATO, EU agenda and policy, because it's completely mad. We've talked a little bit earlier about all of the social, moral decadence of Europe and the United States, from its rampant divorce and breakup of the family, to homosexuality, to the lesbian, gay, transgender,
LGBTQ.
to the LGBTQ, encouraging boys and girls to mutilate themselves, to try and redefine themselves a different sex. This is God's punishment and delusion giving over to America. And it's breaking Europe and the United States apart, I think, in a mental breakdown. Sexual schizophrenia is occurring in the West. Not in Russia, not in Iran, not in Lebanon, not in other countries that have that humility, but it's happening in the West. And you will see massive, I think 6 months from now, you will see massive revolutions and economic breakdowns. Look at what the U.S. just did to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Exactly.
They have guaranteed that the European people will freeze and suffer, but I think the European people will rise up and overthrow violently.
Let the governments perhaps freeze and suffer, but the people, they need to rise up and they need to re-grasp what they have to have from this particular issue. I would like to have your comment, a very swift and concise comment concerning your participation today as a guest of honor in the International Award for Palestinian Literature. How do you see such kind of award? What is Palestine in your psyche, and how do you approach and comprehend this cause and this issue today especially?
Well, the event itself is very, very needed. It's very valuable because it articulates the truth of the Palestinian suffering, and it shows us the prisons where the Israeli Zionists have tortured the Palestinian men and their wives and their mothers and their families. Americans don't know that. The authors that describe the harrowing experiences and that can write the stories for even children's books. This is necessary to fertilize the future generations with an awareness of the evil that has been done, so that they never allow it to be repeated.
Right, Scott Bennett, Dr. Scott Bennett, of course, U.S. Army Special Operations Officer and a global psychological warfare counterterrorism analyst. Thank you very much, sir, for this eye-opening insider insights. Always a pleasure to have you. Always welcome, sir. ودائما الشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا، وحتى نلتقي من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.